30. Genesis 30 and find verse 25. Page 47 in our pew Bibles if you're using those. Genesis 30, verse 25. There was a salesman who walked into one of his customer's office. When he walked in, nobody was around. And he looked around, nobody was there. But he saw this dog. And the dog was going around the office emptying the trash baskets. And he looked, and at first he thought somebody was playing a trick on him. He thought, okay, somebody's up to something here. And the dog's keep on it, he just looks and stares at him. Finally the dog turns to him and he says, hey, it's no big deal, it's just part of my job. And the guy's like, this is amazing, does your boss know you can talk? He goes, oh, no, please don't tell him. If he knows I can talk, he'll make me answer the phone too. Do you know anybody who is constantly manipulating, constantly promoting? They're trying to get themselves ahead. They're trying to get themselves in the center. They're trying to get every advantage, whether it's money-wise or the attention from people or get their image out there. They're just constantly working. And you always feel on guard around them because you've got this suspicion that some way they're working you. They're using you or the situation you're in to benefit themselves. How do you handle this? Right? What do you do when you're in the middle of this? And what do the scriptures have to say for any kind of guidance? We want to look today at another episode in the life of Jacob and Laban. Now these two guys were made for each other. They both know how to deceive. They know how to manipulate. They know how to try to put themselves in the most advantageous position. And in the sovereign humor of God, He brings them together. And there literally is 20 years of manipulation, 20 years of game playing. And I want to look at the games, and then I want to look at the lessons from them. So let's read verse 25 in chapter 30. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, so now Jacob has 11 kids, Jacob said to Laban, send me on my way, so I can go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and children for whom I've served you, and I'll be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you. He's worked 14 years to pay for Rachel and Leah. Verse 27. But Laban said to him, if I've found favor in your eyes, please stay. I've learned by divination, that is consulting other gods, that the Lord has blessed me because of you. He added, name your wages and I'll pay them. Jacob said to him, you know how I've worked for you and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household? What shall I give you? He asked. Don't give me anything, Jacob replied. But if you'll do this one thing for me, I'll go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They'll be my wages. And my honesty will testify for me in the future, whenever you check on the wages you've paid me. Any goat in my possession that's not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that's not dark-colored, will be considered stolen. Jacob is trying to position himself so that there is no question from Laban about what's his and what isn't, because he's had a history with this guy, right? And if it's speckled and spotted, that doesn't lie. And he's trying to come up with something that is clear and couldn't be questioned and couldn't be manipulated. So what are the games that go on here? Well, sometimes it's somebody taking advantage of you by using you for personal gain. Right? They're using you. The relationship isn't about you and them. It's about their personal gain. And so here's Laban. Jacob says, I want to go back home. And Laban says, oh, no, stay. Right? I've learned by trying trying to get a leg up in divination, right? Consulting other gods, that because of you, I've been making out well. And so Laban wants him to stay because Laban gets blessed when he's there. Do you notice what Laban doesn't say? Oh, you're my son-in-law. Don't go. I love you. Right? I love my girls and my grandkids. I'd like them to all stay around. No. This is all about Laban. If you go, my gold mine dries up. I'm advancing because of you. If you leave, that'll all stop. There's nothing about Jacob. There's nothing about his daughters. There's nothing about his grandkids. So he says, how about I pay you? I'll pay you to stay. Oh, that's a great relationship. Right? I'll pay you to stay. And I'll keep getting ahead. Sometimes people will use you because you help them get it. There's an advantage for them in having a relationship with you. Another game is to take advantage by shading the meaning with vague use of words. Right? They're saying something, but they're also not saying something. And there's this vague use of word which allows them an opportunity. So Jacob says, okay, look, I'll take the speckled, the spotted, the striped, the ones that are dark. What he wants is all the rare ones, right? These are not the common ones. These are the rare ones. They're fewer. And he says, I'll take the oddballs. Okay? Laban, just give me the oddballs from the flock. And you notice what he says. Let me go through and pull them out today. Let me do it. How does Laban respond to this? Verse 34 through 36. Agreed, said Laban. Let it be as you have said. That same day, he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats, and all that had white on them, and all the dark-colored lambs. And he placed them in the care of his sons. And then he put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flocks. Laban says, yeah, you can have the speckled and spotted ones. The future ones. Right? Because what happened? Jacob didn't specify. And so Laban takes advantage of him. Laban says, yeah, you can have the speckled, spotted ones, the ones that are born from here on out. And so he grabs all the ones that should have been Jacob's, and he moves them away. And so what is Jacob left? He's left with all these solid-colored animals to tend in the hopes that maybe they'll give birth to speckled and spotted ones. This guy works him over, and it's all because of language. If Laban were alive today, you know what he would be? He'd be a lawyer in Congress. That's what he would be. You have to spell it out. Every word has to be parsed, or you'll leave a legal loophole. That's what he does. So he leaves Jacob starting at 0 with little hope. Wow. What a father-in-law. What a great guy. It's no wonder Jacob wants to leave. Yeah. And so Laban is always shading meanings. He's always leaving himself an out. Sometimes people do that with you. They do that with me. Right? You know what they mean, but they hold to what they said. And they use the loophole of vagueness. Well, the next game that gets played is by Jacob. So he now assumes that his hard work and his human reasoning will grant him success. And so what does Jacob do? He starts off and he takes trees and he strips bark off of it so that you have this dark barked piece of wood and then a white strip that's off of it. And he takes that and he puts it in front of the water troughs, the feeding places, and he puts it so that these animals will look at it with the idea, right, the folk wisdom that if they see something striped or speckled, when they mate, they will give birth to something that's striped or speckled. And so he starts this. He puts it in the water jar. And lo and behold, these animals that are solid color, they start to give birth to speckled and striped. And Jacob pulls them out, right? Sets them off to the side, right? And he puts them in front of the rest of Laban's flock that are still there, so that they'll look at these striped ones, and they'll start to give birth to speckled and spotted and striped ones, right? And so he's working at this. And he does this time after time. This is verses 37 through 40, or 27 through 48. I won't read all of that. But this is what it is. Trying to engage in selective breeding to promote the ones that he's going to get. So if they come out speckled and spotted, they're his. He goes through this whole thing. Lo and behold, it works. That whole process. And Jacob thinks it works because of him, right? He thinks he's been smart, and he's pulled one over on Laban. Look at verse 43 of chapter 30. In this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous. He came to own large flocks. So he starts with nothing. Now he has large flocks. He has maidservants, men servants, camels, and donkeys, right? Jacob has made out like a bandit. He's pulled one over on Laban. So Laban said, yeah, I'll give you those, but you're starting off all on your own. And it looks like everything Jacob has done has worked. Sometimes when people take advantage of you, when they use you, you dig in your heels and you say this, I'll show you. Right? I'll do whatever I can to get one over on you. That's what Jacob does. The next game that gets played is changing the relationship when it no longer works for the other person. Look at verses 1 and 2. It says, verse 31, chapter 31, verses 1 and 2. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, hey, Jacob has taken everything our father owned. And he's gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. Right? Because up until this point, everything Jacob was doing was profiting Laban. And now, what Jacob is doing is profiting Jacob. And he's growing up, and Laban's not getting any of the offspring. They're all coming out spotted and speckled. Right? And Jacob is wearing out a path to the bank. And Laban's getting nothing. And his family looks and they go, uh-oh, it doesn't take a genius to figure out. We're getting nowhere here. He's getting everywhere. Jacob has worked for Laban 14 years. 7 years for each of his daughters. This process has taken 6 more. We find out later in chapter 31. Jacob has been at this for another 6 years. And what sets in is jealousy and resentment. And Jacob finds himself very quickly on the outside. He finds himself rejected. Even though Laban set the terms, even though Laban held the power, even though Laban separated the flock and left Jacob with no advantage whatsoever. Even though the same guy said, oh, please stay, because I found out that God blesses me through you. And now it all changes, right? Laban's tune changes. The relationship changes. And Jacob knows it. Some of you probably have known people that you thought they were your friend. You thought you had a good relationship with them. And then when the relationship is no longer advantageous for them, they turn on you. Your attitude changes. And you haven't changed. You've kept your word, but they no longer want to keep theirs. And it hurts. Jacob, say what you want to about the guy, but he gave this man 20 years. 14 of those years were all for Laban. The last 6 were split. He got to keep some, but he's still working Laban's flocks. Okay? So this is the nature of it. And now it turns. The last game that gets played is when Jacob runs away in fear rather than following God in faith. He's this close to following God in faith, this close. But in the end, he hits the road. Look at verse 3 of chapter 31. Then the Lord said, right? Jacob sees what's going on around him, and then God says to him, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. Go back. And so what does he do? He says, okay, I'm going to gather my wives, and he gathers them. He tells them now what he knows. After the end of 6 years, right? He's going to use hindsight. He's going to look back. And now he knows what's happened because God revealed it to him. So I want to read now starting in chapter 31, verse 4. And we're going to go through the end of the chapter. It's a longer section, but I'm going to read it quickly. So follow along. So Jacob sends word to Rachel and Leah, come out to the fields where his flocks were. Right? You come out and you see what your dad has been doing. Verse 5. He said to them, I see your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know I've worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father's cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. And if he said the streaked one will be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked young. So God has taken away your father's livestock, and he's given them to me. In breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and I saw that the male goats mating with the flock were streaked, speckled, or spotted. And the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, I answered, here I am. And he said, look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted. For I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I'm the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now, leave this land at once and go back to your native land. And then Rachel and Leah replied, do we have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? The answer is no. Verse 15. Does he not regard us as foreigners? The answer is yes. And not only has he sold us, but he's used up what was paid for us. Surely, all the wealth that God took away from our father, it belongs to us and our children. So you do whatever God has told you. Verse 17. Then Jacob put his children, his wives on camels. He drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. And when Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. And so he fled with all he had, crossed the river, and headed for the hill country of Gilead. Now Jacob says, you know, I tried to do this selective breeding thing, and I thought it was me, and I thought it was working. But now I look back, and I see that it was God. And he tells his wife, God told me to go. God was with me. God has preserved me. God has blessed me. And God has produced this flock. Now here's a guy who was used to working his angle. And now all of a sudden he realizes, no, this was God. This wasn't me. This wasn't my work. This was God. His wives wind up getting their father's message. Their father's message was this: you take advantage of anyone you can and any time you can to benefit yourself. And that's what he did. And so these daughters, particularly Rachel, she heard the message. So what does she do? She steals her father's gods. He's not there. Take advantage of him. She's going to swipe those buggers because this is her last chance. And so she's going out of town and she takes them. And Jacob winds up deceiving Laban and he runs off. Here's the games, right? The intrigue, the reality TV show that these middle chapters of Genesis are. On one hand, it makes us laugh. On the other hand, it is so sad. Because this is us. Right? This is how we function without God. Here's Jacob. He has been tricked. He is a game-playing father-in-law. He has been used by his wives as a commodity. He resorts to deception to fight deception. And in the middle of all this, he never asks God. He's never inquiring of God. God has to break in. Right? God has to give him a dream in the middle of us manipulating the flocks to say, it's not you, it's me. Right? You're not doing this. I've been watching. And I've been watching you. And it's time for you to keep your word, to keep the vow you've made. And you head back to your family. And so now Jacob, after all of this game playing, he leaves. I should say he runs away. A very wealthy man. Very wealthy. Those are the games. How about the lessons? What are the lessons that Jacob takes away when he leaves? Well, the first is this. And we need to take these personally. Right? When we're on the receiving end of the game playing or when we're playing the games. Right? Either way. Right? If you're a game player, if you're a manipulator, you think you're always positioning yourself and you're going to get advantage and take advantage of people, or if somebody's doing that to you. God is bigger than the games people play. God is so much bigger than the game. We think we're working things. People think they're smart and they're getting ahead and they're taking advantage, and they have no clue that God is over. He's watching all of this. And he just laughs. He just laughs. Because he doesn't need a speckled flock to produce a speckled flock. My goodness, he spoke and he made that animal from nothing. He's laughing at people's attempts and efforts. You see, God's purposes and God's promises are going to be fulfilled despite the games and sometimes even through them. Laban is going to keep this son-in-law, who apparently is an incredibly hard worker, who benefits him. He's going to keep him right there. He's going to make sure that he can never leave because he'll never have the money to leave. And God laughs. And God laughs because he knows he's going to get that guy out of there and he's going to take him back. Right? Because this guy is going to get renamed Israel. It's through his descendants that God's going to bring his son. And no game playing can stop that at all. You see, we have to remember, in the middle of the gamesmanship, we're in the hands of God. We are not in the hands of men. If somebody is working you over and taking advantage of you, you just remember, God sees. And you are in the hands of God, not in the hands of these people. It sure may feel like it. It may feel like it, but the story's not done yet. We'll get to that in a moment. And if you're the one taking advantage of the people, you need to remember these folks are in the hands of God, like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You don't control their destiny. God does. And it's a frightening thing to treat people this way when they're in the hands of God. Sometimes it looks like the game players are winning. Sometimes it looks that way. I cannot imagine how Laban's family, his sons, laughed when he pulls out all the speckled ones and moves them 3 days' journey away. We got him. Stuck it to Jacob again. Well, they weren't laughing a couple years later. They're full of jealousy and resentment and anger. Why? Because God always wins. God. Not me, not you, but God. God's purposes and his promises, he will always prevail. That song we sang, I will rise when he calls my name. Right? We need to remember, regardless of what games are played here, what happens to our life, in the end, right? Out of our graves, we will rise when the Lord returns. God always wins. And where his people are trusting him, we are sharers in his victory. We have to believe that. Right? And so, you're in the midst of people playing games, guess what? They're not going to win. Well, it may look like it. You may lose some sheep, and you may have to start over from zero, but in the end, God will get you exactly where you need to be, when you need to be, and the way you need to be. God always wins. And so all the games played, we don't have to wring our hands. What we need to do is we just need to chuckle. Just chuckle. They cannot own our attitude and own our joy. Because God will find a way to win in the end. Jacob talks to his wives at the end of the 6 years, and he looks back and he says, you know what your dad did, and you know what I've done, but let me tell you what God has done. Right? It's that look back. We look back in our life and go, God has been with me despite me. God has been with me despite other people. Right? And I need to start crediting Him. Another lesson is this. It's easy to get drawn into the games when we don't consult God. Now, for everything we say about people who play games and manipulate, it is so easy to get sucked down to that level when we don't consult God. Right? When we don't step back and say, wait a minute, what's God have to say about this? So Jacob's gotten drawn into this with his wives and with his children. He got drawn into the games with the sheep and the goats and the manipulation. And in the end, he believes he has to deceive one more time, or Laban will not let him go. Right? If I don't just cut and run, he won't let me go. When he could have said, Laban, probably he couldn't call him Dad. Laban, I serve God, and I'm going at His command, and I'm going at His promise. It's over. And I'm not going because I don't like you. And I'm not going because I'm afraid of you. I'm going because I worship God. And I'm going to walk in obedience to the God who made me and made you and made all these sheep and the goats. And I'm following Him. That's not what he does. Right? He cuts around. He's that close to doing it, but he cuts around. He can tell his wives, but he can't face off this man. I won't be too hard on him, but at the end, he gets drawn in to this gamesmanship. A third lesson. God is a God of revelation, not of the immediate situation. Let me explain what I mean by that. God is a God of revelation. He reveals and He speaks. And we need to think about and relate to Him that way, not in light of the immediate situation. It's not that God isn't there and God doesn't know. But if you read the immediate situation and not the revelation of God, you can get horribly confused and you can even get depressed. Right? We tend to look at the moments. We tend to look at what is happening now. And so something bad happens, we go, oh no. Right? We're like Job and his friends and his wife. Something bad happens and Job says, well, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. That's revelation. That's not the immediate situation. And then later he loses everything. His wife says, why don't you just curse God and die? And Job says, should we accept good and not bad? See, Job is working through all this differently than everybody else, based on what God has to say about Himself. Here's Jacob, who has been tricked with Leah. He has been tricked with the flocks, and his father-in-law changes the rules. These moments, these situations, they seem to always be in flux. They seem to always be changed. They go up and down like the stock market. And we need to pull away from looking at every situation only and step back and hear the revelation of God. So look at verse 2. It says, Jacob notices that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it's been. Uh-oh, there's the situation. But what does God do? Verse 3. Then God says, I want you to go back. You get down to verse 13. He says, I'm the God of Bethel. Remember? That's where you anointed a pillar. That's where I appeared to you in a dream. That's where you made a vow. That's where I revealed myself to you. Right? I'm the God of revelation. Your situation is not the issue. Who I am is the issue. You need to live based on who I am. You need to live based on my revelation, not your situation in the moment. And that's the point. We navigate these moments of life in light of God's Word, not in the light of the moment. So Jacob has to, at this point, exercise some level of discernment. What do I do? Right? And he makes the choice he's going to leave. You see, discernment in the game playing, when we remember God's the God of revelation, is we don't act based on just what benefits me. Daniel would have said, going into the lion's den is not going to benefit me, so I'll do something different. No, he doesn't do that. He doesn't act on self-preservation. It doesn't depend on what benefits me financially. It doesn't depend on me preserving whatever relationships, how I'm treated by others. What it depends on is this. What does God say? And how does the Spirit of God lead? So Jacob has a choice. God says, I want you to go. And I want to remind you, I've been the one who's behind the sheep and the goats. And I've been behind your wealth. And I've made it all happen. And you made a vow to me when I revealed myself to you. And now you need to go. And to his credit, Jacob says, okay, I'm going to go based on the revelation of God. It is so easy to just look at an immediate situation and come to a conclusion about what God is doing or what God isn't doing. That's what we cannot do, right? We cannot just look at circumstances and say, here it is. No, God has revealed himself. He has given us his word, right? And we have things like God works all things together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purposes. That means in the moment of the bad, we need to step back and say, wait a minute. The revealed truth of God is that he can even use this in my life for good. When you're just stuck on situations and not revelation, you can lose it real fast. Time in God's Word tells us things can and will be different because in the end, God will win. God can work things together for good. I've had a number of experiences in my life that I just thought, oh, you've got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. Only to stop later and look back and go, I had no clue what God was doing. And what that was that happened, it was actually good. It was actually better than good. Better than I could have. If I had my way, I would be worse off than God working in the midst of something that didn't look very good at all. Right? This is who he is. Now, with all of that in mind, right, that God is bigger than the games, and we hear from him and we live off of Revelation, the last part in this chapter that we're looking at here is this. Knowing all this, I can still panic and run. I can still panic and run without trusting God. He gets through all this, and you want, like verses 17 through 21, you want him to read. He gets everybody together. He goes to his father-in-law. He tells them about God. And his father-in-law says, you know what, you're right. God is good. He has been faithful. And lets him go and bless him, but that's not what happens. He panics and he bolts. Right? I can still do this. I'm capable of it. Some people wonder, why should I read the Bible? What? Read the Old Testament, read all this stuff. What's in there? I'll tell you what's in there. What's in there is truth for navigating the world and the relationships we live in. Truth for navigating the manipulating games that are all around us. That we've either done them or we've been on the receiving end of them. And here it is. Once again, God is trying to help us. He's trying to talk to us. He's trying to tell us. And so we learn here, and we can rest. I am not at the mercy of the game players of this world. You are not at the mercy of the game players of this world. If your faith is in God, God knows what's going on. He's got his eye on you, and he can bring you out wherever you need to be, whenever you need to be. He is bigger than all of this. And you can trust him. You can trust what he has revealed about his promises and his purposes, and you can trust his nature. What you can't do is just look at something immediate and go, oh no, oh no. No, you got to look out. I have a friend who used to close all of his emails with the letters KLU. Wow, is that some kind of degree? What is this? You know, so I finally, you know, if you know me, I finally will just ask to look. I don't know. What is this KLU? He says, oh, that stands for keep looking up. That's what he put, you know, keep looking up. Because he knows, right? You just look at the Labans of life. You'll get sucked down and destroyed. No, you got to look at God. You got to look at what he said. You got to look at who he is. You got to look at what he's doing. He's bigger than any situation, and he's bigger than any other game. Let's pray.